Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, one of the most famous national parks in the United States. In the summer months, Gettysburg is often filled with tourists, RVs, and buses, crowds so large some days you can barely even find your own space. But in the winter months, Gettysburg becomes a ghost town. There are many times you can find yourself quite alone in this vast national park. I've had the privilege of visiting Gettysburg many times and actually becoming a local to the area. I'm going to share some of my stories with you over the years related to the paranormal. This is story time. As a kid, I was always fascinated by Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I always wanted to visit there, but I didn't get my first opportunity to visit Gettysburg, Pennsylvania until I was 18 years old. This was just a day trip. It took about 2 hours to get there from where I grew up. And when I got there, I just did the usual tour. I drove around, looked at some stuff, and then went home. It was a spring day, and it was a weekend, so the crowds were there. So in terms of looking for anything creepy or related to paranormal, there were no stories that day. I didn't visit Gettysburg again until a few years later. A few years later, I woke up one day at 3 a.m. and decided I just wanted to go for a drive. So I took the 2-hour drive up to Gettysburg. I got there around 5 a.m. It was in the winter, and it was really cold, and it was a weekday, I remember. I went to town, and I went to the Lincoln Diner, which at the time was a 24-hour diner in Gettysburg. I had some breakfast. After I left the diner, it was probably about 5:40 in the morning. I drove over to the battlefield parking lot across from the National Soldier Cemetery. Now, I didn't quite know my way around the battlefield at this time, so I said I'm just going to park here and walk. I knew there was a place called Devil's Den, and I knew I had seen it the first time I was in Gettysburg, but I didn't quite remember how to get there. So I said I'm just going to walk and see if I can find Devil's Den. Now, this was right around 6 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, but it was still a little dark. And I remember the sign for the park saying closed from 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. So I was like, it's 6 a.m. I can technically walk around now. So I started walking. And it was a cold December day. It was a Friday. I remember it so well. It was so cool because I started walking and I never saw a single human soul the whole time. I walked for probably about an hour and I never came across anyone, not even a car. It was so majestic. In a way, I was like, I can't believe I have one of the most famous parks in the world all to myself. I started walking as the sun started rising, walking down the road. At times, I would get the feeling that eyes were watching me, but then it would go away quickly. Then, I started to hear what sounded like footsteps behind me. See, it was so cold that the grass was icy, and as you walked in the grass, you would hear a crunching noise. As I started walking, I would hear the noise behind me. I would look back and there would be no one there. As I continued to walk, all of a sudden out of nowhere, I heard the sound of a cannon go off. It was so quick, but so distinct, I knew exactly what it was. It was amazing. I couldn't believe what I had heard. This is a Friday at 6 a.m. in the winter. There is no reenactments. There is nothing going on. That was amazing to hear. I couldn't believe it. It was a cannon. The sound of a cannon. I kept walking, to see what else I could discover, what else I could experience. Still, I hadn't come across any humans at all. About 30 minutes later, I finally made it down to Devil's Den. And I was completely alone down there too. I remember as I started to walk towards the rocks of Devil's Den, I again heard a cannon go off. It sounded louder and closer that time, I remember. I was videotaping, and I remember thinking, wow, I hope that came through on the camera. As soon as I walked up to the rocks of Devil's Den, I was just amazed. I was amazed. This was only the second time in my life I had ever been there, and this was the first time I had it completely to myself. I put my hand on the rock and just was amazed. Well, quickly, out of nowhere, my hands started to get this really strong pain. It was like my hands were being frozen. The pain was so severe, I wanted to scream. My hands hurt so bad. They were so numb and so cold. I didn't know what was causing this. I had been walking for about 40 minutes, and nothing had happened until I walked up to the rocks of Devil's Den. Then all of a sudden in my chest, I felt like a really severe stabbing pain. I just didn't know what was causing this. So I walked away from the rocks of Devil's Den and walked right across the road, heading towards Little Round Top. And as soon as I cleared the road, the pain went away. I have no explanation for this. I don't know if it was related to the paranormal or not, but it was just creepy and weird. So that day, after that, I walked back to my car. Nothing unusual, and then, the park started to get a little crowded. Not crowded as in summer crowded, but, as I was leaving the parking lot, there were a few people, driving by or pulling in, but that was it. That was a really amazing experience. So after that, I was hooked with going back to Gettysburg again. At the time, I still lived about 2 hours away, so I didn't go up a lot, but whenever I had the chance, I did. My next time I went up was for a 2-day trip in January of that same year. Well, technically the new year, but the same time period. About a month after I walked the battlefield early in the morning, I went up there for a 2-day trip. And I said, I'm going to look for evidence of the paranormal. Again, I got up there around maybe 3:30 or 4 p.m. And when I got to the same parking lot I parked in last time, there were a few people walking around, but nothing really. A few cars here and there. It was starting to get dark, but it wasn't dark yet. It was cloudy. And I started walking. Now, my intention was to just walk as far as I could and as long as I could. I got to maybe halfway to Devil's Den, and then it just got so dark that I said maybe I should turn around and walk back. I didn't have a light on me, no flashlight, no camera lights, nothing really. I was just walking. I just lost track of time. And Gettysburg in the battlefield, this is a park. You don't have street lamps, you don't have anything. So if it's a moonless night or a cloudy night, you're not going to see anything, and you're going to get creeped out walking back in the dark. But I turned around, and I was actually filming, and at this point, the sky was kind of dark blue, kind of like what it looks like in the picture you're seeing right now, except there wasn't any thunder or lightning. And I turn around and I start walking back. And I do walk back to my car. By the time I get there, it's pitch black darkness. But what I didn't realize was in that footage, a figure walks right by me. A clear apparition as I turn around just crosses the road. And you can see through it, but it has the shape of a human body. And it just walks out into the battlefield and continues to walk. And I still can't believe that I captured that. I didn't realize it till months later when I was just reviewing footage. And I said, wow, what's that? And it's not the easiest to see because I didn't film it in HD or anything. It was just a grainy old, I think it was a cell phone. I was just walking. And, but if you're in a dark room and you look at it and you slow it down, because you can slow down YouTube, because I had it on YouTube, you can see it. You can see this figure just walk by me, and it has human shape. I didn't really capture anything else on that trip. The next night, though, I did get Devil's Den all alone to myself. I didn't capture anything down there, but I did feel pretty creeped out down there. But I guess anyone would at night, all alone. Devil's Den is a hard place to be alone at, but you can do it in the wintertime, technically, because there's not as many tourists around. I just remember it was the evening. It was probably about 4 the next night. And I went to Devil's Den. There were a few parents and kids running around the rocks at Devil's Den. I went to the other side of the rocks just to hang out and just to take pictures or whatever. And I came back to the side of the rocks where I could see the cars, and realized I was completely alone. And then it got dark, and then it got a little creepy. And then I felt like I just didn't want to be there, so I walked back to my car and left. But those are the only 2 times I've ever had Devil's Den completely to myself. Anyways, for the next year or so, I would continue to visit Gettysburg whenever I had the chance to. My work schedule definitely allowed me to visit during the weekdays and make trips. And in the winter, the hotels used to be really cheap. So, you could get a decent hotel room for $30 a night in the wintertime. So I would oftentimes just go up there on the weekdays and just get a hotel room and just hang out, get away for a little bit and just explore the paranormal, ghost hunt, or whatever, So I would do that every now and then. But then, in the year 2020, I actually moved to an area close to Gettysburg. I moved to an area about 30 minutes away from Gettysburg. So now, all of a sudden, I could go to Gettysburg anytime I want to. I'm technically a local. So I really used that to my advantage. Now, I was not much of a spirit box user for the beginning of my paranormal research. Now, for those of you who don't know, a spirit box is this device that uses white noise radio frequencies. And it's believed it can pick up voices of ghosts and spirits communicating with you. Now, I know, it sounds crazy, right? I didn't believe it was real either until I actually started getting real responses to my answers. Like, there's no other explanation. It's real. Like, I know that now. But for the longest time, I didn't ever want to use it because I didn't think it was real. Well, the first time I started getting good voices on there, or when I really started using it, I guess, was in Gettysburg. So I always wanted to investigate Gettysburg more. But oftentimes, I never found Devil's Den to be quiet anymore. People are always there. So one time I walked in the woods behind Devil's Den. I walked down the trail. And, I felt like it was kind of creepy back there, isolated. So I would explore back there. One time, I saw like a shadow figure in the woods back there, but it kind of disappeared. Wasn't really anything crazy. I wasn't even 100% sure I saw what I thought I saw. So I don't know about that. I think it was a shadow figure, but I can't say for sure it was. But it was kind of creepy, and it might have been because of things I've seen later on. But anyways, that was my go-to spot. The woods behind Devil's Den. Or in front of Devil's Den. I guess whatever you would consider the front or the back. But it's pretty much the woods across from the parking lot of Devil's Den. Well, one time in the fall, I took a friend up there and we started walking. And we continued to walk down the trail. And I started the spirit box. And we ended up in a place called the Rosewoods. And in the Rosewoods, there's this little wood bridge painted green. And I figured, great, this is the perfect spot to set up a spirit box. Because you can just set it here, just sit here. And before I could even think much more of that, the thing just started talking, saying all sorts of stuff. And I looked at my friend and I'm like, whoa, I've never seen this do this before. I've never seen this thing talk so much. I forget what it was saying, but it was voices. So we started asking questions and we were getting names and responses and yes and no's. And it was just like, wow, this thing's actually talking to us. So the Rosewoods would become my main spot to investigate because I was always getting voices there and stuff. Plus, it was a great point to set up because it's a trail in the woods and you can see both sides if anyone's coming, because you don't want people to interfere with your investigation. If you're asking questions, you don't want to have some strangers walking by. It could mess up the whole investigation. So I would oftentimes go to the woods especially in the evening and at night. Oh, those woods came alive at night. It was very creepy. So I would start going there with my wife, with friends, with anyone who wanted to go. And we would get research, investigate. And I'm telling you, the Rosewoods in Gettysburg, out of all the places I've ever explored, that place has given me the greatest evidence ever. Some of the early EVPs I've captured there, one of the best ones and my favorite ones of all time is a voice that says, "You know we're dead." A lot of times in the Rosewoods, I would oftentimes get angry responses like leave. I would oftentimes ask, "Do you want me to leave?" And they say, "Leave." Yes. One time I even heard a growl come through the spirit box, or an angry growl. Another thing I remember, and now I would go on these investigations in the Rosewoods, I don't know, maybe once every few months, just pack up the equipment, head up there in the evening, and as the sun was setting, start, and it would go into the darkness. One time I said, "If you want me to leave, can you say bye?" And a voice quickly came through the spirit box, said, "Bye." And I was like, oh my gosh, like it's answering what I'm asking. Another time I was with my wife. It was in the fall time. We literally heard footsteps in the leaves right behind us. And then there was a day in February. Now, before I go into the story of the day in February, let me go with a little bit of backstory. Early on in my investigations in the Rosewoods, we would often communicate with a female. And she would claim her name was Anna. And we would always try to talk to Anna. And one time, I left the Rosewoods after investigating, and I went to another part of the battlefield. And I remember saying, "Is anyone here with me?" And a voice came through and said, "Anna." And I'm like, okay, who is this Anna? I would look and do research and look everywhere. And I found a woman named Anna who lived close to the battlefield, technically within the battlefield limits. Her name was Anna Hudelin. She was married to a guy named Cornelius Hudelin, and they owned a farm. Now, this farm was actually used as a field hospital and also as a headquarters during the Battle of Gettysburg. And one thing I remember Anna saying one time is medic, which makes me think maybe this was who I'm communicating with. Now, Anna's house was actually raided by Confederate soldiers on the first day of the battle. And Cornelius came out with guns trying to get them off his property. They actually arrested him, the Confederates did, and he could have been executed. But apparently he was a Freemason, and the Confederate general who was overseeing this issue was also a Freemason, and he said, "Take him back home." So he was spared his life. Now, I realized while researching this that Anna and Cornelius, they lived on their farmland. They had interactions with the battle, and they're buried in Evergreen Cemetery, which is right next to the National Soldier Cemetery in Gettysburg. So I figured maybe that's the spirit of Anna walking around between the graveyard and her old home. So I decided one February morning, there was snow on the ground, it was really cold, to go up there and go to the graveyard, find the grave, go to her old house, which is now a bed and breakfast, and then go back to the woods and try to communicate with her. Well, when I went back to the woods, it was about 10 or 11 in the morning. The woods came to life, and voices were coming through. A lot of voices saying all sorts of stuff. And then, in the footage, in the tree lines, I saw a dark figure. I did not see this with my own eyes when I was filming, but in the video footage, I saw it. There was a dark figure in the tree lines. It looked like a soldier hiding behind the trees. And then in one frame, He's just wandering back and forth between the tree, and then he takes off and runs full speed like he's charging and vanishes. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I can't believe I captured it. I would continue to go back to the Rosewoods and just get all sorts of evidence there. The last time I went there with YouTuber Dan Bell. And we went there in the nighttime. And we were getting voices. And I pretty much said, if you want us to leave, we're not leaving because we want to stay here. Well, about 30 seconds later after I said that, something that sounded like a rock was thrown at us, or in the water behind us on the bridge. But it was really loud, and it came out of nowhere. And it sounded just like a rock. It's like, oh my gosh, what was that? Dan jumped, and I was like, what? Like, this is crazy. We shined a light down in the water to make sure there was no beavers or no anything down there unusual that could have made that noise, but it sounded just like a rock hitting the water. I grew up on a river, and I know the sound of a rock hitting the water. Well, Dan turned around and he said, can you throw something at us again? And we will leave if you do that. We just don't know if that was you. And right on cue, another rock came and hit the water. It was like, what? That was one of the craziest things ever. So those are my experiences at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Like I said, I'm close to Gettysburg now, so I'm always going to investigate. Gettysburg for me is kind of like a playground for research into the paranormal. It is one of the most active spots in the country, in my opinion. And again, you're not going to find anything if you go there in the summer and you go to Devil's Den in the daytime or in the evening. You're not going to find anything if you're standing around with 20 different people. The way you find the paranormal at Gettysburg is you go to the quiet places that no one visits, and you sit and you wait. Now, I will say, from my research so far, Gettysburg does tend to be more active in the winter than in the summer months. In the winter, all the leaves are off the trees, so if you're in the woods, you can see way out. You can see things. In the summer, there have been some days, even some evenings, I went there and just captured nothing on the spirit box. But every time I've gone there in the wintertime, it's been very active. Now, if you've never been to Gettysburg and you're interested in the paranormal, I would definitely say visit there. Go to the woods. Go to the places where you can get some real evidence. The spirits of Gettysburg are there, and they're there to show themselves. Some of them are powerful, and some of them will make their presence known. Now, I'm always willing to meet people in Gettysburg. If you ever want me to take you out in the Rosewoods, I can show you, and I guarantee we'll capture something out there. Just don't be afraid of the dark, because we'll be there in the dark. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time, this is Fixed Image saying peace.